Mr. Speaker, I rise this morning to address my concerns as a result of the Special Inspector General for the Troubled Asset Relief Program audit of the capital injection provided to Bank of America and other major banks through the taxpayer-funded TARP program. Neil Barofksy, the Special Inspector General for the TARP, revealed yesterday in his official report that high-ranking federal officials, including former Secretary Henry Paulson and the current Federal Reserve Chairman Ben Bernanke, misled the American people about the true financial state of Bank of America and 8 other initial TARP recipients that received over $125 billion in this bailout. We were told last October that the Treasury Department needed over $700 billion, along with unprecedented and vast new authority, in order to stave off a total collapse of our financial system. They were going to buy the so-called toxic loans. 10 days later, after the bill passed, they changed their strategy and decided to give TARP funds to financial institutions. We were told last October that this $700 billion would enable the Secretary of Treasury to go in and restore liquidity and stability to our financial system through a series of capital injections into these financial institutions. And most importantly, we were told last October that the federal government was going to inject this money into, quote, healthy financial institutions under the rationale that propping up these healthy banks would enable them to lend money and unfreeze the credit market so that none of the other major banks and private financial institutions would collapse. Almost exactly a year later, we have found out that the American people were not given the full truth. The 9 initial TARP recipients, which received an initial total of $125 billion in TARP funds, were actually not the stable, healthy institutions that Mr. Paulson and Mr. Bernanke claimed they were. And as we all well know today, none of these institutions were able to increase their lending activities. Bank of America and Citigroup in particular actually ended up needing billions more in bailout money than they were initially given. Meanwhile, struggling financial institutions such as Merrill Lynch, which was on the verge of collapse months before the enactment of TARP, was largely ignored until the now infamous and coerced acquisition of Merrill Lynch by the not-so-healthy Bank of America. Neil Barofksky's audit blankly states that, quote, by stating expressly that the healthy institutions would be able to increase overall lending, the Treasury may have created unrealistic expectations about the institution's conditions and their ability to increase lending, end quote. The Federal Reserve, along with the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, also described the 9 original TARP recipients as healthy. Privately, however, other federal regulators and government officials were concerned that some of these institutions were actually in a state of near financial collapse, bankruptcy. These institutions collectively held more than $11 trillion in banking assets, or about 75% of total U.S. bank assets as of mid-2008. Special Inspector General Neil Barofksky's audit concludes that government officials should be particularly careful, even in a time of crisis, of describing their actions in an accurate manner, and that inaccurate statements could have unintended long-term consequences that could damage the trust that the American people have in their government, end quote. Unfortunately, the real damage has already been done. The American people continually put their trust in high-ranking federal officials to do what is best for the good of the people in our country. However, the reality is that most Americans, including the majority of my constituents in the 6th Congressional District of Florida, were already and still continue to be outraged by the $700 billion bailout of Wall Street. Finding out that they were now also misled about the rationale and the criteria in which the Treasury Department, the Federal Reserve, and other federal regulators selected Bank of America and 8 other institutions to be the first recipients of taxpayer-funded TARP money does nothing to lessen the concern or infuse confidence into the future decisions surrounding financial regulatory reform. Many Americans these days feel like Washington is the problem and not the solution. This is unfortunate perception that must be changed. Trust must be restored in the American people's mind to our federal regulators. For as Thomas Jefferson once said, quote, "Follow truth as the only safe guide and eschew error, which bewilders us in one false consequence after another," end quote. And I yield back the balance of my time.